Hey guys, tonight we drift back into the uneasy stillness of a world barely catching its breath, its wounds from the First Global War still fresh, its borders shaky, and its peace, well, more like a polite pause. You're standing in the middle of a dusty street in a small European town. The year is 1920. Cobblestones glisten from a recent rain, but the air is dry, silent, and waiting. A little too quiet, like the kind of silence that says, brace yourself. And brace you should, because, spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this timeline. Not as yourself, anyway. What lies ahead are collapses, coups, and one very intense mustache that's about to reshape the planet. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments, where are you tuning in from and what time is it over there? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk past a newspaper stand. The headlines in bold: inflation soars, nation in crisis, coal shortage worsens. The world is supposed to be at peace, yet it doesn't feel like it. Germany, once a central pillar of Europe, is fractured and humiliated. The Treaty of Versailles, signed just a year ago in 1919, was meant to stop the bleeding, but it acts more like a suture on a bullet wound. It punishes rather than heals. One mainstream historical consensus calls it the most significant catalyst of World War II, and honestly, you'd be hard-pressed to disagree while watching entire economies unravel like old wool sweaters. You drift further, now standing in a bakery where prices rise faster than the bread. A loaf that cost 1 mark now demands thousands. The German mark inflates so violently that by 1923, children play with stacks of bills like building blocks. People burn paper money for warmth. You reach out, feel the thin paper disintegrate in your fingers, worthless and oddly warm. Scientists still argue whether economic desperation alone could create a dictator. But when hunger gnaws and national pride rots under foreign boots, the human psyche gets suggestible. Enter fringe ideologies with their simple answers, and shouting men promising strength. You hear that shouting now, louder with each step toward Munich, Germany. It's 1923 again. A failed painter, war veteran, and now rabble-rouser named Adolf Hitler tries to seize power in a beer hall. The beer hall putsch ends with gunshots and arrests, not the victory he expected. But history has a cruel sense of patience. Hitler goes to prison, yes, but from that cell he writes Mein Kampf, outlining a future soaked in blood and brutal dreams. You blink, and now you're in Rome. The air smells like cigars and leather. Benito Mussolini has marched on the Capitol with his black shirts. Italians, weary of chaos, hand him the keys. Just like that, democracy sputters out in Italy, replaced with theatrical speeches and nationalism soaked in ancient Roman grandeur. Mussolini becomes the first domino of the 20th century authoritarian wave. Meanwhile, Japan, proud and resource-starved, eyes expansion. Its military holds sway over a puppet emperor, and in 1931, it invades Manchuria. You float above the invasion, watching soldiers march over snow-swept hills, the rising sun flag fluttering like a warning. The League of Nations condemns the move, and Japan shrugs. No real punishment comes. A dangerous lesson is learned. The world will talk, but it won't act. Back in Germany, the 1930s crash like thunder. The Great Depression hits hard. You walk the streets of Berlin, where soup lines stretch around corners and men in suits sell apples to survive. People want answers. Order. Blame. They turn again to that failed artist, with a gift for rage and theater. In 1933, Hitler is appointed chancellor. It feels like a compromise at first. Keep your enemies close and all that. But within months, he consolidates power. The Reichstag burns. Civil liberties vanish. Political rivals disappear. And the Enabling Act gives him near total control. You stand in the middle of a rally. Red banners flap against storm-gray skies. The crowd roars as Hitler speaks, their fists punching the air like exclamation marks. You want to whisper, "Don't follow him," but history doesn't listen. Here's a fun fringe tidbit. Historians have debated for years whether Hitler was addicted to methamphetamines. Diaries and medical records suggest a cocktail of stimulants and strange treatments, including injections of bull semen. Yeah, you're welcome for that image. Now imagine this. While Germany arms in secret, most of Europe snoozes in denial. Britain and France preach appeasement. Let him have the Rhineland, they say. Let him take Austria. It's practically his anyway. And when Hitler annexes Czechoslovakia's Sudetenland in 1938, well, they still hope it'll stop there. Spoiler alert, it won't. And let's not forget Spain. In 1936, a brutal civil war erupts between Republicans and nationalists. It becomes a bloody rehearsal for WWII, where fascist Germany and Italy test their weapons and tactics while democracies awkwardly sip their tea and look away. Scientists still argue whether the West's inaction here emboldened future aggression, but hindsight makes the silence deafening. You drift again, this time to a hidden bunker deep in the Polish countryside. The year is 1939. Germany signs a non-aggression pact with Stalin's Soviet Union, a shocker that stuns the world. But in secret, they carve up Poland like a cake. On September the 1st, 1939, Hitler invades from the west. 2 weeks later, the Soviets swoop in from the east, and with that, the world shatters into war. Your heart pounds in rhythm with the marching boots. You see Polish cavalry charging German tanks with sabers, an image both exaggerated and misunderstood, but nonetheless symbolic of the imbalance. Modern machines crush tradition. Science marches alongside war now. Mainstream fact check. Radar, still primitive in the 30s, starts its rise here. Britain ramps up development, quietly laying the groundwork for a tech breakthrough that will soon help win the skies. But for now, the world holds its breath. France and Britain declare war, but make no move. This strange pause is called the phony war. It's like everyone knows the punch is coming, but no one throws it just yet. So there you are, standing at the edge of the abyss. Economies broken, ideologies hardened, science caught in the crossfire, and human beings, well, we're about to do that thing we do best when we're scared and angry. We burn it all down. You wake up to the soft hum of morning, only it isn't morning. It's 1940, and the sun doesn't rise gently over Europe anymore. It crashes down in bursts of flame and steel. The phony war is over, and Germany has finally thrown the punch. You're standing on a windswept plain in Denmark. It's early April, and German paratroopers are already falling like dandelion seeds from the sky. Trucks roll in, planes roar overhead. Denmark surrenders in 6 hours. That's it, 6 hours. You barely have time to blink before you're on the move again. North to Norway. The fjords, normally peaceful and postcard perfect, now echo with the deep clanging of German naval engines and the snap of gunfire. You float beside the German battleship BLCHER as it steams into Oslofjord. Norwegian gunners, brave but outmatched, strike a lucky blow. The massive ship lists and sinks, dragging hundreds of sailors with it. But Norway still falls. Another domino topples. You trace the advancing tide like a thread on a torn map. Now, drift south. France, Belgium, the Netherlands. The Germans hit them all at once in May 1940. Like a magician pulling a dark curtain across the continent. You're in Rotterdam when the bombs fall. Glass rains down, fire curls upward, civilians scatter, and just like that, another city crumbles. The Dutch surrender after a single day of bombing. Science fact incoming. The German blitzkrieg, lightning war, tactics were terrifyingly efficient. A combo of tanks, mechanized infantry, and dive bombers, coordinated by radio, created speed and surprise. It wasn't just brute force, it was psychological warfare delivered at 40 miles per hour. Now, you're riding inside a panzer tank, racing across Belgium. The engine growls beneath you. The air smells like grease and burning wheat fields. You expect to face the bulk of the French army up ahead, but they're not there. They're waiting behind the Maginot Line, a supposedly impenetrable wall of defenses. Problem is, Hitler's tanks just drove around it, through the Ardennes forest, a place everyone thought was too dense for tanks. Oops. Quirky tidbit. During the invasion, some French generals still used carrier pigeons for communication. Not exactly ideal when you're up against tanks, radios, and airplanes. One pigeon was even awarded a medal for delivering critical intel. Imagine explaining that to a drone operator today. Meanwhile, British and French troops retreat to Dunkirk. You stand on the shore as thousands huddle under the gray sky, their boots sinking into the wet sand. Enemy planes buzz like mosquitoes. And then, like something out of a movie, Hundreds of small civilian boats cross the channel. Fishermen, yacht owners, lifeboats. They come not for glory, but to bring their boys home. Scientists still argue whether Hitler's decision to pause his tanks at Dunkirk was strategic mercy, arrogance, or plain indecision. Whatever the cause, over 330,000 Allied troops escape. It's not a victory, but it's not defeat either. France, though, France falls. Paris is declared an open city to avoid destruction. You stroll down the Champs-Élysées, now echoing with the rhythmic stomp of German boots. A Nazi flag unfurls atop the Eiffel Tower. The world holds its breath. Again, back in Britain, Winston Churchill, gruff, stubborn, cigar-clenching Winston, is now Prime Minister. He growls on the radio, "We shall fight on the beaches." You hear it in real time, curled under a blanket in a London flat as bombs begin to fall. The Blitz begins. For 57 consecutive nights, the Luftwaffe rains destruction on British cities. You peer through cracked window panes as flames paint the skyline orange. Families shelter in underground stations. Children sleep with gas masks beside their pillows. The air buzzes with tension, broken only by air raid sirens and the thrum of bombers overhead. Mainstream science fact: radar now comes into play big time. British scientists perfect chain home an early warning system that detects incoming aircraft. It gives the Royal Air Force just enough time to scramble fighters. Without it, the Battle of Britain might have gone very differently. Now imagine this: you're a British pilot in a Spitfire, engine roaring as you corkscrew through the clouds. You spot a Messerschmitt. Your hands grip the throttle. Sweat beads your forehead. This isn't Call of Duty. You only get one life. You dive. You fire. You pull up at the last second. Somewhere below, people cheer. Fringe fact: some British pilots painted cartoon characters on their aircraft for luck. Donald Duck, Popeye, even Mickey Mouse, flying into battle, fists raised. Scientists still argue whether these superstitions actually boosted morale, or just made the pilots feel a little less mortal. But let's zoom out now, because while Britain holds firm, the world is shifting. In the east, Stalin's Soviet Union is busy, swallowing up neighbors. Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, all absorbed like appetizers. Meanwhile, Hitler turns his eyes southward to the Balkans and Greece. And don't forget North Africa, where sand and steel are about to clash in dramatic fashion. We'll get there soon. Right now, you stand on the edge of an airfield. Night has fallen. A British bomber crew climbs aboard a Lancaster. Their mission, Berlin. The engines whine, then roar. The bomber lifts into the dark, flying blind above a continent on fire. They know they might not return. Most don't. The war has entered a new phase. Total war. No one is safe. Cities, farmlands, libraries, museums, even the stars feel darker. But amid the rubble, people adapt. They carry on. One woman in London becomes known for setting her tea kettle precisely at 9 p.m., just as the first wave of bombs hits. Her neighbors say it's the most British thing imaginable. You smile, then yawn. The warm air around you crackles like old vinyl. So many moments, so many lives suspended in this storm. And yet, somehow, it's just beginning. You drift through smoke so thick it stains your sleep. Beneath your feet, the Mediterranean glows with the heat of war. North Africa calls. It's 1941, and the desert is not silent. You wake to the rasp of sand against steel, to a horizon painted in rust and fire. The Sahara isn't the empty nothing it pretends to be. It's a war zone, a burning chessboard stretching from the coast of Libya all the way to the Suez Canal. And right now, you're somewhere near Tobruk, Libya, squinting against the glare as tanks clank forward in lines like mechanical elephants. The British 8th Army faces off against the Afrika Korps, led by none other than Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox. Cunning, bold, endlessly resourceful. He moves like wind through dunes, now here, now gone. You try to predict his next move. You fail. Mainstream science fact: warfare in the desert teaches armies to rethink everything. Heat exposure, dehydration, mechanical failure from dust. Soldiers become part scientist, part survivalist. Engineers modify tanks with air filters and camouflaged nets made of palm leaves. You know, just normal weekend craft projects that might save your life. You duck behind a rock as an Italian Fiat tank sputters past. Don't worry, It'll probably break down before it sees you. The Italian forces, bless them, aren't exactly intimidating. Many surrender at the first opportunity, hands raised high like sunflowers. Still, the fighting is brutal. The siege of Tobruk lasts 241 days. You scavenge water from rationed tins, steal shade beneath wreckage, and hear bombs whistle like bird song. You grow used to the silence before impact. You sleep in boots. You wake with dust in your teeth. And when the tide turns, it turns fast. Rommel's brilliance nearly wins the continent, but logistics, sweet, underestimated logistics, cripple him. Fuel shortages, overstretched supply lines. Scientists still argue whether Rommel could have taken Cairo had Hitler committed more resources. He didn't. You breathe easier. Quirky tidbit. British troops in North Africa used to name their tanks after girlfriends and pub favorites. You might find yourself riding into battle in a Sherman called Miss Emily, or Ye Olde Land. Adds a certain charm to impending doom. But as you nap beneath a shredded canvas tent, trouble stirs elsewhere. Back in Europe, Hitler's next move is, well, not great. Against the advice of pretty much everyone not goose-stepping in a bunker, he invades the Soviet Union in June 1941. Operation Barbarossa. Biggest military invasion in human history. You're now flying over Poland, watching columns of German tanks thunder eastward. The ground shakes. Villages vanish beneath their treads. Hitler expects it to be quick, maybe 10 weeks. You roll your eyes, because you've seen the size of Russia. It eats armies. Still, the early months favor the Germans. Cities fall like dominoes. Minsk, Smolensk, Kiev. The Luftwaffe bombs rail lines and supply hubs. German infantry push deeper, deeper. By September, they're outside Leningrad. By October, Moscow. And then winter comes. Oh, friend, the Russian winter doesn't arrive. It ambushes. Suddenly you're freezing in a field near Vyazma. Your boots crack with frost. Your breath crystallizes mid-air. German troops shiver in summer uniforms while Soviet defenders, bundled and furious, dig in. Mainstream science fact: cold exposure without proper insulation leads to trench foot, frostbite, and hypothermia. Some German soldiers had to sleep with engine parts under their coats to keep them warm enough to start in the morning. You don't sleep much. The snow swallows everything. You see a man fire his rifle. The bullet ices over before impact. That's probably an exaggeration, but it feels true. Supply chains collapse. Engines seize. Horses die by the thousand. Moscow does not fall. Russia does not kneel. Stalin calls it the Great Patriotic War. And it is. Fringe detail. Soviet troops used dogs strapped with explosives to blow up enemy tanks. Problem was, they trained on Soviet tanks, so the dogs often ran the wrong way. Tragic. Absurd. Real. You sit beside a frozen river, legs numb, watching the Germans dig in for a winter they swore would never come. Hitler grows impatient. His generals grow worried. Scientists still argue whether the invasion was doomed from the start or just badly timed. Either way, you feel it. Barbarossa has stalled. But while snow falls in the east, something far darker brews behind the front lines. You pass through villages in Belarus and Ukraine. Empty. Burned. Silent. In the distance, you see pits, hear muffled cries. The Einsatzgruppen, Hitler's mobile killing squads, leave behind nothing but numbers. It's systematic, calculated, incomprehensible. The Holocaust is no longer theory. It is industrialized murder. You shudder. The air thickens. Time slows. Back in Berlin, trains begin their grim commute toward Poland, to places with names you've only whispered: Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor. You feel the wheels turning on cold iron tracks. A machine of death that runs on silence and ash. Scientists still argue how much the German public knew, and how much they chose not to know. The world, meanwhile, is distracted, because now, it's December the 7th, 1941. You're standing on the deck of the USS Arizona. It's a quiet morning in Pearl Harbor. Tropical breeze. Lazy gulls. Sailors joke over breakfast. Then, hell. Explosions split the sky. Japanese planes dive like falcons. Bombs scream. Ships buckle. You hear metal shriek like a wounded animal. Oil ignites across the water. Men jump into fire. You dive too, into disbelief, into history. The United States is in the war now, not just as an observer, as a participant, and you feel the world shift beneath you. Mainstream science fact: Japan's attack was preceded by months of intercepted intelligence, but due to signal delays and bureaucratic bungling, the warnings didn't reach Pearl in time. Cue every conspiracy theory ever. Quirky tidbit: one of the Japanese planes that bombed Pearl Harbor crash-landed in Hawaii, and the pilot was captured by a local with a hunting rifle. Just imagine explaining that to your commanding officer. As the smoke clears, the war becomes truly global. America mobilizes. Factories roar. Draft cards flutter. Ships are launched by the dozen. Women take over assembly lines. Rosie the Riveter flexes from every billboard, and you're swept into a whirlwind. From the desert heat of Libya to the frozen mud outside Moscow to the blazing decks of Pearl Harbor, this war no longer follows rules. It expands like fire. And you, sleepwalking through history, carry the scent of gunpowder into your dreams. You close your eyes. For now, you wake to the clatter of typewriters and the soft hum of fluorescent lights. It's 1942, and America has shifted into fifth gear. You're no longer just wandering the battlefronts. You're inside the belly of the industrial beast. You stroll through a Detroit factory, where car frames have been replaced by bombers. Giant B-2 for liberators roll off the line like jelly beans. Rosie's not just riveting, she's working 10-hour shifts, pounding rivets with lipstick still on. You spot her wink at a guy lifting engine parts. His name's Bill. He's 19, can barely grow a mustache, and he's about to be drafted. Across the country, ration stamps rule the kitchen table. Butter's scarce. Gasoline's tighter than your grandpa's belt buckle, and nylon. Forget it. Parachutes come first. You line up for war bonds behind a lady holding a Victory Garden catalog, and a guy humming Glenn Miller. Everyone's doing their part. Even Bugs Bunny is roasting Hitler on Saturday mornings. Mainstream science fact: the U.S. economy expanded by more than 75% during WWII. It was the biggest single mobilization of manpower and industry in history. Your toaster might have been melted down for airplane parts. That's sacrifice. Then, suddenly, you're not in Detroit anymore. You're in a steaming jungle. Guadalcanal. The air buzzes with mosquitoes and tension. Marines whisper between banana trees. You swat a beetle the size of a light bulb off your canteen. It's humid, loud, and smells like sweat, gunpowder, and canned peaches. Japan's empire, once sprawling from Korea to the Solomon Islands, has peaked. And now, slowly, painfully, the Allies are clawing it back, inch by inch, island by island. Fringe tidbit: some Japanese troops in the Pacific believed in Bushido so fervently that they considered surrender worse than death. A few even hid in the jungle for decades, literally, thinking the war never ended. One guy held out in Guam until 1972. That's commitment, or delusion. You feel it here, the raw edge of desperation. U.S. troops fight under impossible odds. Supply lines stretch thin. Tropical disease kills more than bullets. And the Japanese don't retreat. They dig in. Bunkers, caves, trenches. You see it during the Battle of Guadalcanal. Nights lit by tracer fire. Daybreaks haunted by bayonets. You crouch beside a Marine scraping spam into his mouth with a pocket knife. War's hell, he mutters. Understatement of the century. Scientists still argue whether Japan's strategic overreach was their true downfall, or whether U.S. naval power simply became too overwhelming. Probably both. Either way, you're knee-deep in the fallout. Back in Europe, things are equally messy. You're in a cramped Royal Air Force briefing room in southern England. Cigarette smoke curls toward the ceiling. A commander taps a stick against a chalkboard map. Tonight's target, Cologne, or maybe Dresden. You lose track. You climb into a Lancaster bomber. Engines roar. The floor vibrates through your boots. As you fly, cities glitter below, then vanish in flames. It's the era of strategic bombing. Maximum damage, minimum mercy. Mainstream science fact: high-altitude bombers operated in such thin air that crews had to wear oxygen masks to stay conscious. Temperatures often dropped below -30°C. Imagine trying to reload while your fingers freeze to the ammo belt. You drop bombs, then watch other planes drop from the sky. Flak tears through the night like angry confetti. Somewhere out there, a German pilot in a Messerschmitt watches you too. He doesn't blink. And yet, You come home, barely, but the ground war looms again. You're in a tank outside El Alamein, Egypt. Remember Rommel? He's still trying, but Montgomery, the British general, is ready. The tide turns in Africa. The 8th Army punches west, and soon the Allies land in Morocco and Algeria. Torch. That's the name of the operation. You chuckle, because right now, your socks are soaked, your helmet smells like wet dog, and you're not sure if the guy next to you is snoring or crying. Fringe detail. British soldiers used to nickname Montgomery, Monty, and occasionally mocked his pompous tone with tea-time impressions during breaks between shellings. Yes, even in war, sarcasm survives. You drive Nazis out of Tunisia, celebrate with tepid beer. Then someone mentions Italy, and like a broken GPS, you're rerouted again. Next stop, Sicily. You land on a sun-bleached beach in July 1943. The invasion is smoother than expected. Mussolini's popularity is in free fall, literally. By the end of the month, he's arrested. Italy surrenders. But, plot twist, the Germans dig in and defend the country themselves. You start climbing, because Italy is mountains, mostly steep, muddy, brutal mountains. You trudge through Anzio, Monte Cassino, places that sound like wine labels, but feel like nightmares. Scientists still argue whether the Italian campaign hastened the end of the war or simply drained resources. You argue with your feet, they're soaked, blistered, and definitely don't care. Quirky tidbit, to camouflage Allied tanks during Italy's snowy winters, soldiers painted tree branches and snowflakes on them. It helped, kind of, until the snow melted. Meanwhile, you're hearing whispers about a plan, a massive invasion across the English Channel, a second front to crush Germany from the west. You nod slowly, the pieces fitting together. Factories in America are working overtime. Soviet forces are grinding down the Eastern Front. Japan is losing islands. Mussolini's out. Rommel's retreating. And now the Allies want to kick down Hitler's front door. D-Day is coming. You can feel it in the cold breeze off the channel, and in your stomach. But for tonight, you rest under a camouflage net in a sheep pasture in southern England. Rain taps on your helmet like a lullaby, and you try not to think about the beaches of Normandy. Not yet. Your boots sink into the wet sand. The air reeks of salt, diesel, and fear. June the 6th, 1944, D-Day. You're staring at the gray, churning water of the English Channel as Higgins boats bob in rows like metal coffins, their ramps ready to drop. Keep your head down, someone yells, but your head's pounding too loud to hear. You're storming Omaha Beach. Bullets slice the wind. Sand jumps like popcorn under machine gun fire. A man next to you falls without a sound. Just drops like he's done with the day. The waves don't stop. Neither do you. Remember that soft background hum you were supposed to fall asleep to? It's been replaced with the tinnitus of war. But somehow, you push forward, past Belgian gates, those jagged X-shaped beach obstacles meant to rip open boats like sardine cans, past tank traps and bodies. You grab a handful of Normandy soil, like that'll stop your legs from shaking. Mainstream science fact, the tides at Normandy were carefully calculated using moon cycles and decades of coastal observation. Timing the landing with a rising tide gave engineers just enough time to clear mines and obstacles before the main assault. You reach the base of the bluff. Climb, crawl, pray. Above you, German bunkers spit fire like dragons, but they're outnumbered, outflanked, and eventually overwhelmed. By noon, the beach is crawling with Americans. Behind you, across 50 miles of coastline, other Allied troops are landing at Gold, Juno, Sword, and Utah beaches. British, Canadians, French commandos. You're not alone in this madness. Fringe tidbit, the Allies created a fake, phantom army, before D-Day, complete with inflatable tanks and dummy radio chatter, to trick Hitler into thinking the invasion would hit Calais instead of Normandy. It worked. He held back troops, expecting a second attack that never came. You move inland, through hedgerows, those thick, tangled Norman walls, that turn every field into a fortress. Fighting here is slow, close, and personal, like trying to brawl through a garden maze. You duck behind cow pastures, and pray the cows don't explode. They've been mined too. But slowly, painfully, the Allies push forward. By August, Paris is liberated. You march into the city behind columns of tanks. Crowds cheer. Women throw flowers. A little boy waves a torn French flag. Someone kisses you on the cheek. It smells like perfume and wine. You think, maybe, just maybe, this war is ending. Spoiler, it's not. You head east, toward the German border, toward the Ardennes. You're in Belgium now, December 1944. It's freezing. Your breath hangs like ghosts in the air. Snow crunches underfoot. The trees are too quiet. Then, an explosion of noise. The Battle of the Bulge. The Germans' last major offensive. A surprise attack meant to split the Allied line and recapture Antwerp. It almost works. You're caught in it. Trapped in Bastogne with the 101st Airborne. No winter gear. No supplies. Just grit and snow. Mainstream science fact. The human body starts to lose dexterity at 50 degrees F. Below freezing. Your fingers clench. Joints stiffen. And simple tasks, like reloading a rifle, become agonizingly slow. In Bastogne, temperatures drop below 10 degrees F. You huddle in foxholes, listen to artillery, and pass chocolate rations around like gold. Planes can't fly in the fog. Reinforcements are delayed. The town is encircled. And yet, you hold. Fringe tidbit. When the Germans demanded the Americans surrender Bastogne, General McAuliffe replied with a single word, nuts. Historians still debate whether it was defiance or delirium. Either way, it made headlines. You hold. Reinforcements arrive. Patton punches through the snow and rescues the town. And the German offensive crumbles. Hitler's gamble fails. But now, the Allies are done playing defense. You cross the Rhine on pontoon bridges. Cities fall behind you. Cologne, Frankfurt, Nuremberg. The Siegfried Line collapses. Germany bleeds. You pass through ruined villages. The walls still whisper. Old men stare with hollow eyes. Children ask for chocolate in 10 different accents. But you don't stop. Berlin is still ahead. Scientists still argue whether the delay at the Bulge prolonged the war by months or simply burned out Germany's last reserves faster. Either way, you feel the fatigue deep in your bones. And then something shifts. You reach a camp. Not a military one. A place with barbed wire and barracks and too many ghosts. You walk through the gates of Buchenwald. The stench hits first, then the silence, then the faces. Sunken, skeletal, barely alive. You're not prepared for this. Even now, you struggle to process what you're seeing. The ovens, the piles, the cruelty etched into every inch of the place. You thought you knew what evil looked like, until now. Fringe fact, some liberating soldiers reportedly gave their rations away to prisoners, not realizing their stomachs couldn't handle rich food anymore. Many survivors died from the sudden shock of kindness. Mercy, too, can be deadly. You don't speak. You can't. You just stand there, wind whistling through the broken fences, and vow to never forget. And then, Berlin, it's crumbling. Soviet forces slam in from the east, the Allies from the west. Hitler's world shrinks room by room. You feel it in the air, that end of war tension. Every soldier talks like it's almost over, but nobody wants to be the last to die. You push through the outskirts of Berlin. Shells fall like rain. The city's skyline is fire. And underground, in a bunker thick with smoke and paranoia, Hitler takes his own life. The war in Europe is over. People dance in Times Square. Soldiers kiss nurses. Radios hum with victory speeches. You watch from the edge of a bomb crater and light a cigarette with shaking hands. But don't relax just yet, because halfway around the world, Japan is still holding on. You step onto a wooden pier slick with ocean mist. The Pacific air is warm and salty, but your gut knots tighter than it ever did in Europe. This is a different war. This is the Pacific Theater. You squint at the island ahead. Okinawa, a lush, green dot in the vast blue. Peaceful looking, like a tropical vacation. But don't be fooled. Beneath the palms and coral reefs lies the bloodiest battlefield of the Pacific, and you're about to become part of it. You're riding in a Higgins boat again. The same steel bathtub you used in Normandy. Same ramp, same nerves, different ocean. The water here is clearer, almost hypnotic, like it's daring you to relax. Don't. The Japanese bunkers are carved into hillsides, and they're waiting, patient, silent, deadly. Okinawa, April 1945. Your boots splash onto the shore. No bullets, no screaming, just seabirds and rustling leaves. Creepy, right? But soon, the illusion shatters. A mortar round shrieks from a hillside. Dirt flies. A soldier in front of you drops. You dive, heart hammering, and realize you're not storming a beach. You're walking into a maze of caves, cliffs, and death traps. Mainstream science fact: Okinawa's unique limestone terrain, karst topography, formed a natural fortress of ridges, sinkholes, and caves, giving Japanese defenders perfect cover for guerrilla resistance. You move inland slowly, painfully. Every hill is a stronghold, every ridge a kill zone. You fight through places with names like Sugarloaf Hill and Hacksaw Ridge, names too sweet for what they hold. You huddle in a foxhole one night, rain tapping the helmet you haven't taken off in days. The stars peek through drifting clouds, and for a second, it's beautiful. You think of home. A radio plays a tinny jazz tune. Then, an explosion. You jerk awake. A Japanese soldier crawled into a nearby foxhole. He didn't survive the attempt. Neither did the guy next to you. Fringe tidbit: Okinawa saw the first mass use of kamikaze pilots, Japanese aviators who deliberately crashed planes into Allied ships. The term means divine wind, referencing a typhoon that once repelled Mongol invaders centuries earlier. Poetic and horrifying. You look out to sea. Flames lick the night sky as ships burn offshore. Navy men are screaming over the radio. The kamikazes keep coming. You pass through Okinawan villages, if you can call them that. Most have been bombed to ash. Civilians hide in caves, terrified of both sides. Some run toward you waving white flags. Others run away, convinced you'll kill them. Many don't run at all. Scientists still argue whether cultural indoctrination or desperation led to the horrifying mass suicides of Okinawan civilians. Families jumped off cliffs. Mothers poisoned their children. Some fought soldiers with farm tools. You try not to remember their faces. You take Shri Castle. You take the southern tip of the island. You hold the line until there's no line left. By June, Okinawa falls. But you've lost over 12,000 American soldiers. More than 100,000 Japanese troops are dead. And perhaps worst of all, more than 100,000 civilians lie buried beneath the island's shattered earth. Okinawa was supposed to be the final push, the launch pad for invading Japan itself. But now, you're exhausted. Everyone is. So is Washington. Because here's the math no one wants to do. Invading Japan might cost 1 million lives. And so, a decision is made August the 6th, 1945. You're not in the plane, but you hear about it before the news breaks. A city named Hiroshima disappears. Mainstream science fact: the bomb, codenamed Little Boy, used uranium-235 and unleashed energy equivalent to over 15,000 tons of TNT. The temperature at ground zero reached over 7,000 degrees F, hot enough to vaporize steel and turn humans to shadows. The mushroom cloud rises. Buildings vanish. People vanish. Firestorms rage for hours. Radiation clings to the rubble like invisible smoke. Then, 3 days later, Nagasaki. A second bomb. Fat Man. This one uses plutonium, even more complex, even more deadly. Over 100,000 civilians die across both cities. Some instantly, some slowly, over weeks, months, years. Scientists still argue whether these bombings were necessary to end the war, or a demonstration of power to scare the Soviets. You sit in stunned silence. The radio crackles. Japan has surrendered. The war is over. But instead of dancing in the street, you stare at the sky and wonder what we've become. You ship home. The Pacific wind follows you like a ghost. On the dock, people cheer. A band plays. You step off the ship and back onto American soil, with the 1,000-yard stare of someone who's seen too much. They pin medals on your chest. You don't care. Someone hands you a soda. It's too sweet. Someone else hands you a newspaper. Victory in the Pacific. The headlines scream joy. Your mind whispers ashes. You walk down your hometown street. Trees sway. Dogs bark. A kid rides a bike. You try to match their rhythm, but your feet feel out of place. Too slow. Too cautious. Because once you've ducked under fire in a coral cave, crossing a sidewalk feels alien. You sleep in your old bed. But not really. The mattress is too soft. The quiet is too loud. You dream of sand, steel, and shadows. Scientists still argue whether trauma rewires the brain permanently, or just temporarily dulls your senses. You don't argue. You just exist. Fringe fact: some returning GIs reported feeling phantom bullets, twinges of pain or pressure in places they were never wounded. Psychosomatic echoes, some say. Residual adrenaline, Others guess. You visit a friend's grave. He didn't make it out of Normandy, or Iwo Jima, or Bastogne. There are too many graves to remember which. The world starts rebuilding. Germany is split. Japan becomes an ally. The United Nations is born. And you try to live. You get a job. Maybe start a family. Maybe drink too much. Maybe sit on the porch and stare at thunderstorms with a blank expression. But sometimes, you remember. The roar of engines over the channel. The freezing wind in Bastogne. The cave-lit horror of Okinawa. The moment your boots touch sand for the last time. And you whisper, softly, to no one in particular, we survived. For now. You stretch your legs as the train clicks steadily through the countryside. The war is technically over, but peace feels like a fragile truce inside your own body. You lean your head against the cool window pane, watching farmland blur by, golden wheat, sleepy towns, silent barns like guardians of secrets no one wants to tell. You're headed to Nuremberg. The name already carries weight. It's where the Nazis once threw rallies like rock concerts. Thousands of torch-bearing fanatics screaming for a 1,000-year Reich. But now, the old city will become the backdrop for a new kind of reckoning. Nuremberg trials. You arrive in late fall. Cold clings to the stone walls. You step inside the Palace of Justice, a building older than most of the soldiers, who never made it out of the Ardennes. A grand hall has been converted into courtroom 600. Everything smells of dust, ink, and too many ghosts. You're not on trial. But you sit in the audience. You watch. You listen. You try not to grind your teeth when a defendant scoffs at the word genocide. There they are, Goering, Hess, Ribbentrop, and the others. Some still arrogant, some gaunt, all unmistakable. You see them in person, not as newspaper caricatures but as breathing, blinking men. That's the part that rattles you the most. Monsters shouldn't look this normal. Mainstream science fact: human brains tend to experience cognitive dissonance when confronted with evil wrapped in familiar packaging. It's easier to imagine villains with horns than ordinary bureaucrats, signing death orders with gold pens. You listen to testimony that turns your stomach inside out. Holocaust survivors speak through translators, their voices trembling but precise. They recall railcars packed like coffins, showers that sprayed gas instead of water, piles of shoes, millions of them, each pair once dancing on a street somewhere. A forensic doctor details how Ziklinby kills. Your throat tightens. One afternoon, a man testifies that his baby was taken from his arms and thrown into a pit. The court goes silent. Even the stenographers pause. You close your eyes, trying not to picture it, but you do. Scientists still argue whether the scope of the Holocaust could have been stopped earlier had more nations believed the reports coming from underground resistance. There were whispers, yes, but belief came late. Quirky fact: the Nazis documented many atrocities with chilling detail, including train schedules and crematoria capacity. Some historians joke grimly that bureaucracy may be more immortal than ideology. You return to the trial day after day. You hear Goering boast. You watch as witnesses unravel years of propaganda with quiet rage. You see a German lawyer break down in tears while defending someone he once admired. In the evenings, you wander the old town. The medieval buildings are scarred, some rebuilt with fresh stone. You pass a bakery, its windows glowing with warm light. A little girl tugs her mother's hand inside, oblivious to the courtroom just blocks away. You buy a coffee. It tastes like chalk. You toss it. Later, you overhear two Americans arguing in a hallway. Hang them all. Versus, even monsters deserve a fair trial. You don't chime in, you just listen. You're too tired to pick sides anymore. Or maybe you finally realize history isn't a sideshow. One evening, you sit next to a British war correspondent with a flask tucked in his coat. He murmurs, "You'd think justice would feel heavier, but it's so damn light. Isn't it? Just words, verdicts, ropes." He drinks. You don't. Eventually, sentences are handed down. 12 Nazis are condemned to death by hanging. Others receive prison time. A few walk free, fueling arguments that will last for decades. Mainstream science fact: the Nuremberg trials were the first time the concept of crimes against humanity was legally defined. This formed the foundation of international law that still governs war crimes today. You leave the courtroom on the final day. The sky is pale gray, like a city trying to forget what it saw. Snow begins to fall, quiet, indifferent. You visit the ruins of a Nazi rally ground. The grandstand is cracked, weeds sprouting from where swastikas once waved. You climb the steps, stand where Hitler once screamed. The wind whistles. Nobody's listening now. You pull a cigarette from your coat, light it with shaking hands, and whisper, "It's over." But even you don't quite believe it. You return to the States again, older in ways no mirror could explain. People ask you what it was like. You smile and say, "Complicated." It's easier than unpacking all of it. Fringe tidbit. Some attendees of the trials claimed they could feel a pressure in the courtroom, like history itself was sitting beside them. Superstition, maybe, but try sitting through testimony like that, and not feeling haunted. You sleep a little better at night, now that the worst of them are gone. But justice is slippery. For every man hanged in Nuremberg, 100 others disappeared into forests, or slipped into new suits and jobs in quiet little towns. Scientists still argue whether true justice is even possible after such catastrophe. Is it accountability, closure, prevention, or just the ritual of remembering? You keep the trial program tucked in a drawer. Some nights, you unfold it and trace the names with your finger. You're not sure why. Maybe you're trying to convince yourself that words matter, that truth wins. And then, you close the drawer. Because tomorrow, the world moves on again. You wake to the smell of dust and pine. You're somewhere in Eastern Europe now, tracing the thread of something that doesn't quite have a name. Not revenge, not even justice. Maybe it's understanding, or maybe just unfinished business. The war is technically over, yes, but what no one tells you is how long it takes the war to leave people's bodies. In Poland, in Ukraine, in Latvia, you walk through forests, where the silence is so heavy it presses on your shoulders like a rucksack. You come across villages where the streets don't quite smile yet. Children stare at you with wide eyes, unsure whether you're a savior or just another uniform. You pass by women with scarves tied tightly over their heads. Their eyes are distant, like they're watching memories walk ahead of them. You visit one town, Oswiecim. Locals barely say its name. To you, it's Auschwitz. You step through the arched gate. Arbeit matched frei. Work sets you free. Irony so cold it burns. The camp is a museum now, but the walls haven't forgotten. You walk past piles of shoes, mounds of hair, tiny toothbrushes that once belonged to children. You run your fingers along wooden bunks, stacked like crates for bodies. You step into the gas chamber. It smells like stone and sorrow. Mainstream science fact: when humans experience overwhelming trauma, the brain sometimes numbs out to protect itself. Dissociation, it's called. It's why you feel like you're floating above your own body sometimes, like watching a movie you didn't choose. You meet a survivor there, an old man with a cane and a voice like rust. He shows you the number tattooed on his arm. When you ask what it means, he simply says, "I was a file, not a person." He offers you tea later, and you realize kindness is a kind of rebellion. You pass a tree near the fence. Someone's carved their name into it, probably after liberation. It's grown wider since, bark curling round the letters like it's trying to hold on to them forever. Back in town, you stop by a library. The books are cracked and faded, but one catches your eye. It's a children's story, printed before the war, full of drawings of flying geese and laughing bears. It sits quietly on a shelf, surviving what most people couldn't. Fringe fact: during the Holocaust, some prisoners secretly created art using smuggled paper and coal dust, hiding it under floorboards. These pieces were discovered decades later and now hang in European museums. Their mere existence is defiance. Scientists still argue whether memory, cultural, inherited, or personal, can be passed through DNA. Some claim the trauma of genocide alters genetic markers for generations, causing anxiety, insomnia, or heightened vigilance in descendants who never experienced the horror themselves. You don't know if that's true, but you've seen the grandchildren of survivors flinch when a train horn blows. You move west. You cross into Germany again. Berlin. You expect more rubble, more ghosts. But what you find is rebuilding. A city with amnesia and ambition. Cranes hang like skeletons over the skyline. Jazz plays in cafes where Gestapo agents once sipped espresso. You're amazed by how quickly the world forgets how close it came to ending. You wander into a bookstore. A teenage clerk tells you, in accented English, that the shop once belonged to Jewish owners. She says it casually, like the weather. You nod. She shrugs. Mainstream science fact: Germany, Post-war, implemented. Vergenheitsbewältigung, literally, coming to terms with the past. It's a national philosophy of reckoning, apology, and remembering. Few countries have tried anything similar, with such brutal honesty. And yet, memory phrase. In another bar, you overhear two young men complaining about dwelling too much on history. You sip your beer and bite your tongue. You've learned when to speak and when to let silence speak for itself. At night, you stroll along the river Spree. The moon hangs low, like it's eavesdropping. A swan floats past, unbothered by anything human. You chuckle quietly. Animals always seem to move on quicker than people. Quirky fact, during the final days of the war, Berlin's zoo was bombed. Some animals escaped into the city streets. There were reports of heos in fountains, and even a leopard roaming the suburbs. No one believed it until someone found paw prints in a bunker stairwell. You pause on a bridge, hands on the cold railing. Somewhere beneath the water are the ruins of bridges Hitler tried to destroy in retreat. The city chose to rebuild most of them, but not all. Some scars, it seems, are left on purpose. You travel again. France, Italy, then back to England. In London, people talk about Churchill like a grumpy uncle. Loved, but exhausting. The newspapers debate whether he should be retired sooner. You see his face carved into marble, and later, printed on cigarette cards. You remember how he once said, "If you're going through hell, keep going." You whisper that to yourself while waiting in line for the loo at a pub. You read about the Marshall Plan in a cafe, the massive American effort to rebuild Europe. People forget it wasn't just charity, it was strategy. A stable Europe meant fewer Nazis to .0 popping up in the ruins. Mainstream science fact, economists now credit the Marshall Plan with not only rebuilding Europe's economy but also preventing widespread famine and communist revolutions in fragile post-war nations. Turns out, capitalism tastes better than hunger. Still, it wasn't perfect. Some called it cultural imperialism with a smile. Scientists still argue whether American involvement post-WWII was benevolence or strategy masquerading as compassion. You think it's probably both. Most things are. You return to your hotel. You take a bath for the first time in weeks. You sink under the water and close your eyes, hearing distant echoes of boots, gunfire, prayers. You dream of a forest path covered in snow, a voice singing in Polish, and a child handing you a flower. You wake up crying, and don't know why. The world is rebuilding, so are you. You're on a train again. Trains feel safe now. Strange, considering how many didn't make it to the right destination during the war. But this one hums gently, rolling past meadows in the Netherlands, windmills like sleepy giants nodding in the distance. You sip coffee from a paper cup that tastes vaguely like cardboard and gratitude. You're heading to Arnhem, and your knees bounce slightly, not from caffeine, but anticipation, because Arnhem is where optimism met its match in 1944. During Operation Market Garden, it was supposed to end the war by Christmas. It didn't. You arrive just as the sky turned slate gray, that delicious Dutch overcast that makes every photo look like a postcard. You step out and imagine parachutes, thousands of them, blooming above you like deadly snowflakes. Young men floating down, praying the wind doesn't carry them off target. You follow the road to the famous bridge. Not a bridge. The bridge. The one that was too far. Mainstream science fact. Studies of wartime decision-making reveal how overconfidence can skew judgment. Psychologists call it optimism bias, the belief that you're less likely to fail than others. Allied generals had it in buckets here. At Arnhem, the British 1st Airborne was dropped behind enemy lines to secure the bridge, but German reinforcements were faster. Paratroopers ended up surrounded, low on ammo, using teacups as grenades and throwing stones when bullets ran out. You're not even joking. You crouch down beside the riverbank and let your fingers drag through the water. Cool, soft, indifferent. You wonder how many boys crossed this same stretch, clutching rifles and breath in equal measure. You meet an old woman in a nearby shop, who tells you, in perfect English, that she remembers hiding in a basement with her sisters during the operation. We thought the roof would come down. We didn't cry. We were too busy counting. Counting what? The seconds between the bombs, she says. Fringe fact. Some local Dutch children carved messages into potatoes and hid them in trees to warn soldiers about nearby Germans. A few of those spuds were found decades later, shriveled and fossilized. One reads simply, "Bad man here." You ask the shopkeeper if she ever feared the Allies. Her answer is surprising. No. They were boys. Scared, polite boys. One of them gave me chocolate. I still have the wrapper. Scientists still argue whether military intelligence failures at Arnhem were due more to ego or faulty technology. Radio communications failed spectacularly, leaving entire battalions in blackout. Some historians say it was arrogance. Others blame cloud cover and bad batteries. You continue on. Belgium calls. Specifically Bastogne. You bundle up because even in your imagination, the Ardennes bites. You trudge through mud that looks like melted chocolate. Except it smells like rot and boots. Trees here stand like soldiers themselves, scarred, unyielding, quiet. Bastogne was the heart of the Battle of the Bulge, the German army's last great offensive. Hitler's desperate Hail Mary to break Allied lines and turn the tide. Instead, it froze, literally, sub-zero temps. American GIs dug foxholes into frozen soil with spoons and helmet edges. Supplies were low. Ammunition, food, medicine, all nearly gone. You crouch in one of those holes. It's narrow, like a coffin. You wiggle your toes to keep blood moving. You whisper the word, nuts, under your breath, because that was General McAuliffe's reply to a German surrender ultimatum to the German commander. Nuts. The American commander. You can't make that up. Mainstream science fact. Prolonged cold exposure leads to hallucinations. Some Bastogne soldiers reported hearing music, or seeing their mothers walking through the trees. The brain, desperate for warmth, fires off ghosts. One GI later recalled trying to smoke a frozen cigarette, convinced it would warm him up. It broke in half and he cried, not because he wanted nicotine, but because it reminded him of home. You walk the Bastogne woods and spot tiny artifacts in the mud, buttons, bits of canteens, rusted belt buckles. Every piece once belonged to someone trying very hard not to die. You feel like a time thief picking through memory. Fringe fact, some soldiers swore by tucking onions into their boots to keep warm. Scientists say this has absolutely no thermal benefit. But try telling that to a kid from Kansas with frostbite on both feet, and a letter from his mom in his shirt pocket. Scientists still argue whether the German failure in the Bulge was due to Allied strength or Hitler's delusion. Most say both. He refused to retreat even when logic said so. Logic had long left the building. You hitch a ride with a local farmer, who shows you a barn still peppered with bullet holes. He says his grandfather patched it once, then stopped. History needs scars, he shrugs. In a small cemetery outside town, you kneel before rows of white crosses. Snow piles softly on their arms. One has a teddy bear tucked underneath. Its fur wet and matted. A child left it there last winter. You whisper thanks to no one in particular. The wind carries it away anyway. The road from Bastogne winds slowly through the Ardennes, curling like a snake too tired to strike. You ride in a military jeep, the seat rough beneath you, the sky gray as stale bread. There's a hush to these woods now, but you know better. They once echoed with gunfire and cursing and the occasional whispered prayer from someone who didn't believe in much until the bullets flew. You're headed toward the Siegfried Line, or what's left of it. You probably remember that bit from the history books, the German defensive line stretching hundreds of miles. Bunkers, tank traps, rows of dragon's teeth, like jagged stone maulers erupting from the earth, designed to keep the Allies out. Didn't work. Mainstream science fact, defensive architecture during WWII was as much psychology as engineering. Zigzag trenches weren't just to minimize shrapnel impact, they were designed to confuse attackers under stress, exploiting something called cognitive overload. Your brain doesn't make great decisions while being shot at. As you approach the crumbling bunkers, you notice the air thickens. It's probably just damp moss and diesel fumes in your mind, but it feels heavier, like the ground remembers being stepped on by tank treads. You climb one of the remaining pillboxes, a stubby concrete box half swallowed by vines. Inside, it's smaller than you thought. Cold, silent. You imagine the German soldier stationed here, bored and terrified, scribbling in a notebook, and wondering if he'll ever see Berlin again. Fringe fact, some soldiers on both sides believed that carrying a photo of a loved one, folded precisely 7 times, offered mystical protection. One American even had his pinned to the inside of his helmet. It didn't save him, but his buddy swore it kept the helmet intact. Scientists still argue whether the Siegfried Line delayed the Allied advance significantly, or simply gave the Germans something to rally around. What's agreed is this: every day the Allies fought there, men died, slowly, quietly, in pine-shadowed mud. Your breath clouds as you walk the line. You duck under rusted barbed wire. Trees grow up through some of the tank traps now. Nature's middle finger to military engineering. You touch one and it's warmer than expected. Probably just the sun, but it gives you a strange chill. Next stop, Cologne. You expect rubble. You get it. The train station survives, somehow, though it probably shouldn't. You step out and face the Cologne Cathedral. It's magnificent, blackened with smoke. Its towers claw the sky defiantly. Allied bombers destroyed nearly every other building in the city, but not this one. Mainstream science fact: strategic bombing during WWII was intended to cripple morale and production, but cities often became more unified under attack. Scientists now call this the Blitz Spirit effect, named after London's infamous endurance under German bombs. Cologne was hit over 260 times. The cathedral took 14 direct hits and still stood. You crane your neck, looking up at the Gothic spires. They don't blink. Inside, it's quiet. Dust motes swirl like tiny ghosts. A local tells you people used to take shelter here, praying as the roof shook. She says it calmly, like she's describing a cake recipe. You walk toward the Rhine. Bridges stretch over it like bones. The Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen, further south, was captured intact. Huge win. But this one, flattened. You see old film reels in your mind. Bombs dropping, smoke rising, German soldiers running for cover, Allied forces inching closer by the hour. Fringe fact: during heavy bombing raids, some Cologne residents swore they saw a red mist creeping through the streets. Scientists say it was likely a combination of phosphorus dust and blood vapors, not paranormal activity. Still, you wouldn't go looking for it at night. Scientists still argue whether urban bombing campaigns like this truly hastened the war's end, or simply redirected suffering. Civilians bore the brunt. Some experts say the cost outweighed the gain. But then again, hindsight wears a comfy bathrobe and drinks decaf. You pause by a pile of stones that was once a bookstore. A plaque reads, "Words rebuild faster than walls." You run your fingers across the etched letters. The metal's cold, but something in it pulses. You leave Cologne with a strange ache in your chest. Might just be all the walking. Now you're in Nuremberg. Here, the war echoes differently. You walk through the rally grounds first. Massive stone platforms, colossal ruins of ego. Hitler's voice once boomed here, amplified through giant speakers and rigid rows of humanity. Now it's just pigeons and ivy. Mainstream science fact: researchers studying crowd psychology often cite Nazi rallies as extreme examples of collective identity manipulation. Human brains are wired for rhythm and symmetry. When thousands move together, they bond, sometimes fatally. You wander through Zeppelin Field, once the stage of militaristic theater, now cracked and crumbling. It's poetic. Concrete seats broken, nature trying to reclaim the stage. You sit for a moment, imagining the sounds, the roar of the crowd, the propaganda, the fear disguised as devotion. Fringe fact: there's a rumor that during one rally, a young boy got lost in the columns and didn't resurface for hours. He was found asleep, curled up under a banner. The guards thought he was a symbol. He just wanted a nap. You walk slowly toward the Palace of Justice. It still stands tall, reserved and patient. Here, in 1945, the world put war on trial. The Nuremberg trials weren't just about justice. They were about defining evil in legal terms. Crimes against humanity. Genocide. A new vocabulary, born in blood. Scientists still argue whether these trials set a meaningful precedent, or simply wrote history's version of a morality play. But for the first time, leaders were held accountable for war as more than just politics by other means. You step into courtroom 600. The wood paneling smells old, like worn books and moral exhaustion. You sit quietly and imagine Gring, Hess, Ribbentrop, all once gods in their own eyes, now caged behind language and law. The guide says the courtroom is still used today, You wonder if the ghosts of justice still pace behind the benches. The wind outside tastes like old secrets. You light a candle in a church on your way out, not because you're religious, but because you hope someone's watching. Anyone. As night falls, you catch your reflection in a shop window. You don't look like someone who just walked through World War II. But maybe that's the point. The chill of early morning creeps under your collar as you trudge down the cracked cobblestone streets of Dresden. Mist clings to the Elbe River like a soft, shrouded whisper, muffling the world in gray. It's easy to forget that only months ago, this city burned with the ferocity that turned it into a hellscape. But here you are, standing among ruins and rebirth, walking through the fragile ghosts of a place once called Florence on the Elbe. Dresden wasn't just any city, it was a cultural jewel. Palaces, art galleries, and Baroque architecture lined its streets like a necklace of treasures. The bombing of Dresden in February 1945 was controversial then, and remains so now. It wasn't just the destruction, it was the firestorm that followed, an inferno that swallowed whole neighborhoods, turning people into shadows and ash. You step carefully over shattered bricks and glass, each crunch underfoot a reminder of the past. A stray cat darts by, its fur singed, but eyes sharp and alert. Somehow, life insists on persisting. Mainstream science fact: firestorms like Dresden's are created when intense bombing causes massive fires that feed on their own heat, creating hurricane-force winds. Temperatures inside can soar above 1,000 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt steel and human bone alike. You pause beside the ruins of the Frauenkirche, once a radiant Lutheran church, now a skeletal reminder of devastation. The dome, collapsed in 1945, lay in rubble for decades until painstaking reconstruction began long after the war. It stands again today, a symbol of peace and resilience. You imagine the choir's voices rising, long ago, filling this space with hymns and hope. Fringe fact: some Dresden survivors believe that a mysterious figure, a man in a trench coat, appeared during the bombing, guiding people to safety. Stories say he vanished as suddenly as he came. Scientists remain skeptical, but these legends persist like embers in the dark. Scientists still argue whether the scale of the Dresden bombing was a necessary strategic blow, or an unnecessary tragedy inflicted on civilians. The debate twists and turns through history like the river itself, complex, murky, unresolved. Moving on, you pass through the Albertstadt district, once a sprawling military base. Today, it's quieter, but the ghosts linger. You can almost hear the muffled sounds of marching boots, orders barked in the chill dawn, and the metallic clink of rifles being checked. You duck into a small cafe, one of the few places that survived intact. The air smells like strong coffee and fresh bread. The elderly owner tells you stories in broken English, his voice low and tinged with sadness. He speaks of his childhood during the bombing, of running through smoke-filled streets with his mother clutching his hand. War makes you small, he says, and large, too, if you live. You sip the bitter coffee, feeling its warmth seep through your hands. Outside, a group of tourists laugh softly, unaware of the city's scars beneath their feet. Mainstream science fact: stress from warfare can cause lasting neurological effects, even altering brain structure. PTSD wasn't well understood then, but we know now that trauma leaves physical marks. You walk toward the new city center, where modern glass buildings reflect the sky in sharp shards. It's a city reborn, but the past is never far. You find a quiet spot by the river, and let the gentle flow wash over your thoughts. Water, always moving, always changing, yet somehow constant. Fringe fact: there's a local legend that the Elbe River carries the souls of those lost in the bombing, their whispers heard on misty mornings. You lean close but hear only the lapping of water and the distant call of a heron. Scientists still argue about the ethics of wartime targeting, how to balance military necessity with civilian safety. Dresden remains a stark lesson, etched in stone and memory. You watch a family feeding ducks, their laughter light and unconcerned. You wonder if peace, like the river, finds a way to flow through even the darkest scars. As dusk falls, Dresden's lights flicker on, soft and hopeful. You take a deep breath, feeling the weight of history settle, then lift, just a little. The dawn breaks with a muted glow, as you find yourself trudging through the dense forests of Ardennes. The air here is thick with damp earth and pine, a quiet that feels almost unnatural. You remember the whispered rumors from years ago, an offensive so fierce it would shake the very ground beneath your feet. The Battle of the Bulge wasn't just a clash of armies. It was winter's cruel test, a last desperate gamble by the Germans to turn the tide. Branches crack beneath your boots, and the chill nips at your fingers. The forest seems endless, its shadows long and secretive. You squint through the frost-tinged air, and imagine the sounds of artillery booming through these woods, the bark of rifles, and the whispered prayers of soldiers, trying to survive in the biting cold. Scientists still argue about how weather shaped the battle's outcome. Some say the heavy fog and snow initially helped the German advance, masking movements. Others argue the harsh winter ultimately crippled both sides. Either way, the snow is not just a backdrop, it's a brutal character in this story. Mainstream scientific fact: exposure to extreme cold can cause hypothermia, frostbite, and impaired decision-making, factors that played huge roles during this winter battle. The human body struggles to maintain warmth when temperatures plunge below freezing, especially when exhausted and poorly equipped. As you push deeper into the woods, you stumble upon a makeshift foxhole, now overgrown with moss and fallen leaves. It's easy to picture a young soldier huddled here, clutching a worn photograph, trying to steady his trembling hands while the world outside threatens to collapse. Fringe fact: some locals swear they've seen ghostly figures wandering these woods at night, phantoms of the Battle of the Bulge, replaying their final moments. While scientists remain skeptical, the eerie silence lends some credence to these tales. You move to a small clearing, where remnants of an abandoned tank lie half buried in mud and snow. Rusted and silent, it's a stark monument to mechanized war's brutal efficiency. You imagine the roar of its engine, the deafening blasts, the frantic commands shouted over the chaos. Amid the destruction, you find a trampled diary page fluttering in the wind, its ink faded but words still legible. It speaks of hope, fear, and the longing for home, a poignant reminder that behind every strategic move were human hearts. Scientists still argue whether the Battle of the Bulge was the turning point that hastened the war's end, or a costly distraction prolonging the conflict. The debate swirls through history books and documentaries alike. You push forward, feeling the weight of winter settle deeper into your bones. Somewhere nearby, a small stream gurgles, its icy water rushing over rocks. The sound is comforting in this frozen wilderness, a reminder that life persists even in the harshest conditions. As twilight descends, you find a crumbling chapel nestled among the trees. Inside, faded murals depict scenes of peace and salvation. You sit quietly, letting the silence wrap around you, like a soft blanket. The battle may be over, but its echoes remain, etched into the forest and the souls who passed through here. The faintest glow of dawn barely filters through the thick haze as you find yourself walking the battered streets of Stalingrad. The city, once vibrant with life and culture, now lies in ruins, a sprawling graveyard of broken buildings and shattered dreams. Every cracked wall and twisted beam tells a story of relentless struggle, where frostbite gnaws at skin and hope flickers like a fragile flame in the unforgiving cold. You trudge over rubble, each step crunching through shards of glass and debris, the bitter wind biting your cheeks. The stench of smoke and decay hangs heavy in the air, mingling with the sharp scent of gunpowder. It's hard to imagine this was once a bustling hub on the Volga River, now a brutal arena for one of the most brutal battles in history. Scientists still argue whether the Soviet strategy of hugging the enemy, staying close to German lines to neutralize their artillery advantage, was a stroke of genius or reckless desperation. Whatever the truth, it changed the nature of urban warfare forever. Mainstream scientific fact: prolonged exposure to cold stress can impair cognitive function, reduce physical performance, and increase susceptibility to illness. Factors all soldiers endured in the brutal Stalingrad winter. The cold was as much an enemy as the opposing army. You pause by the remnants of a once grand theater, its effigy pocked with bullet holes and crumbled bricks. Inside, the air is stale, the silence oppressive. It's easy to imagine the terrified civilians and soldiers who took refuge here, holding their breath as shells exploded around them. Quirky tidbit: some survivors spoke of a rat war within the ruins, where infestations of vermin thrived amidst the chaos, scavenging and adding a surreal layer of horror to the already dire conditions. The Battle of Stalingrad was a slow, grinding siege of attrition. You feel the weight of desperation in the air, the endless cycle of attack and counterattack, the starved defenders digging in with bare hands, the relentless bombing that turned the cityscape into a nightmare. You stumble on a faded photograph caught between bricks, a portrait of a young soldier smiling confidently before the war. It's a haunting reminder of the life snatched away, dreams cut short. Scientists still debate the exact number of casualties, with estimates ranging widely. What is clear is that Stalingrad marked a pivotal shift, breaking the myth of German invincibility and turning the tide on the Eastern Front. As the sun rises higher, the harsh light reveals the scars etched into the city's bones. You take a moment to breathe in the frozen air, feeling the echoes of sacrifice and resilience that refuse to fade. Despite the devastation, life clings stubbornly to the rubble, and somewhere beneath it all, hope quietly persists. The relentless roar of artillery fire fades slowly as you shift your focus to the vast expanse of the Pacific Theater. The humid air clings to your skin, heavy with salt and the scent of tropical foliage. Palm trees sway lazily, masking the chaos beneath. The brutal island-hopping campaigns where jungle vines hid dangers as deadly as any bullet. You wade through muddy trenches, feeling the squelch of wet earth beneath your boots. The air buzzes with insects, and distant explosions shake the ground like thunder. This is no serene paradise. It's a battlefield where heat and humidity sap strength just as fiercely as enemy fire. Scientists still argue whether the U.S. strategy of island hopping, bypassing heavily fortified islands to strike weaker points, was a brilliant tactical innovation or a gamble that prolonged the war. Either way, it showcased a new form of warfare that blended naval power, air supremacy, and ground combat into a deadly dance. Mainstream scientific fact: tropical diseases like malaria and dengue fever afflicted more soldiers in the Pacific than combat wounds, illustrating how nature itself was an insidious adversary. You spot a rusted Sherman tank half buried in jungle foliage, its gun barrel aimed due ceaselessly toward the sky. Nearby, a weather-beaten flag flutters weakly, a silent testament to the fierce battles waged to secure these remote outposts. Quirky tidbit: some soldiers claim to hear eerie, inexplainable noises in the jungle at night, whispers in the leaves, footsteps where no one stood, a phenomenon now partly attributed to auditory hallucinations caused by exhaustion and isolation. The battle for Guadalcanal feels endless as you navigate dense undergrowth and hidden booby traps. The clash between American and Japanese forces is marked by close-quarters combat, with soldiers fighting for every inch of ground. Amid the oppressive heat and swarming insects, you pause at a makeshift graveyard. Wooden crosses weathered by rain and sun, names etched into the wood tell stories of young men from distant cities, brought together in this remote corner of the world by the tide of war. Scientists still debate the strategic value of some Pacific battles versus their human cost, questioning whether the sacrifices were fully justified or born of political necessity. As twilight descends, the jungle's chorus rises, the croak of frogs, the rustle of leaves, the distant crackle of gunfire, all blending into a symphony of survival and endurance. The Pacific War was a test of resilience, ingenuity, and sheer willpower, fought not just against an enemy, but against an unforgiving environment. You take a deep breath, feeling the weight of history settle quietly around you. As night cloaks the island, you awake to the first light breaking over the European horizon, a cold dawn casting long shadows across a continent still scarred by years of conflict. Cities lie in ruins, their skeletons of stone and steel silent witnesses to the war's devastation. The air smells of ash and hope, a fragile promise of peace mingling with the lingering echoes of gunfire. As you walk through the battered streets, you feel the weight of lives forever changed. Civilians and soldiers alike carry stories etched deep into their souls, tales of courage, loss, and the relentless pursuit of freedom. You listen closely to the whispered memories that drift on the breeze, fragments of a history that refuses to fade. Scientists still debate the psychological impact of prolonged warfare, with some arguing that the trauma reshapes societies just as much as the physical destruction. Post-traumatic stress, once misunderstood, now reveals the hidden scars carried by millions. You find yourself standing before a memorial, its cold marble reflecting the soft light. Names stretch endlessly, a testament to sacrifice and the human cost of global conflict. Nearby, survivors gather, their faces lined with the stories of survival and resilience. Quirky tidbit: During the final months of the war, Allied forces used ghost armies, inflatable tanks and fake radio traffic to deceive the enemy, a clever ruse that changed the course of battles. Without a single shot fired, the war's end ushers in a complex mix of relief and uncertainty. Nations begin the slow, painful process of rebuilding, grappling with the aftermath while forging new alliances to prevent future conflicts. The seeds of the Cold War are already taking root in this fragile peace. You breathe in deeply, the crisp morning air filling your lungs, carrying with it a sense of closure and a quiet invitation to remember. The stories of World War II are not just about battles and strategy, but about the resilience of the human spirit in the darkest of times. Scientists still argue whether the rapid technological advancements during the war accelerated or hindered post-war recovery, a debate that echoes through history. As you turn away, the sun rises higher, bathing the ruins in golden light, a reminder that even after the darkest nights, dawn will come. And so, you have just traveled with me through those turbulent years, the fierce battles, and the stories of resilient people during World War II. Perhaps you have felt the breath of history, the sounds of gunfire mingling with echoes of hope and survival. Even in the darkest moments, the light of courage and an unyielding spirit never fades. Now, as night falls, let the images and stories you've just heard become part of your dreams. Let your soul settle, as if you're walking along a misty path, gentle and peaceful. All pain and loss gradually drift away, leaving only calm and faith in a brighter tomorrow. Remember, history is not just dry pages in a book, but valuable lessons, reminders that no matter the circumstances, humanity can rise and reach for the light. And you, listening to this story, can carry that flame within yourself, a flame that never goes out. Thank you for journeying with me through these chapters. I look forward to seeing you in the next part, where we will continue to uncover deeper layers and untold stories of World War II. Sleep well.